Hey guys, tonight we're going up. Not up the corporate ladder, not into a feel-good TED Talk arc about climbing toward your dreams. No, we're climbing something older, weirder, and far more dangerous. We're climbing a beanstalk that may very well be the last thing Jack ever touched with human hands. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. You know the story, or at least you think you do. Poor boy. One cow, desperate mum, mysterious stranger, magical beans, a giant, some theft, some running. Then boom, Jack's living large and everyone's clapping. The end, except it's not. Because this story is 5,000 years old, older than books, possibly older than language itself. And what it's hiding beneath the nursery rhyme sugarcoating is something a lot closer to a descent into the underworld than a rags to riches fable. Let's start with Jack, because Jack, as you'll notice, is not the smartest match in the book. But he is something worse. Jack is desperate. He and his mother are starving. And I don't mean forgot to meal prep this week hungry. I mean the kind of hunger that makes you hallucinate, that makes your body eat itself, that makes people trade morality for calories. They have one cow left, one. And in a society where livestock equals survival, that's not just your dinner, it's your lifeline. Jack takes it to market, as one does, to exchange it for money or food. Logical. Except he doesn't. He meets a stranger, who may or may not be human, and trades that cow for beans. Not a plot of land, not a week of food, not even bread. Beans, and not just any beans, magic ones. But magic, in ancient stories, rarely means sparkle and wishes. It means sacred, dangerous, untouched by man. Beans, as it turns out, have a reputation that far outlives vegan chili. In Greek mythology, beans were believed to contain the souls of the dead. Literally. Orphic priests avoided them entirely. In some cultures, farting was considered a spiritual act because of beans. Each release a ghost breath. The Pythagoreans, they banned them. Because legumes were seen as spiritual vessels, connections between the living and the dead. So Jack doesn't just make a bad deal, he trades life for death, cow for ghost seeds. And then, like the world's most overconfident grave robber, he plants them. Now you might be thinking, it's just a fairy tale, but fairy tales are myths in drag. They wear little red hoods and glass slippers, but underneath, they're carrying knives. And this one, it's about climbing up, but not in the way you think. So next we're going to follow Jack into the sky, into the strange, mist-choked world above the clouds. But let me warn you, what he finds up there, it isn't gold, it's not glory, it's myth. And like all good myths, it has teeth. Dim the lights, this is just getting started. So Jack plants the beans, and he goes to bed. And somewhere in the middle of the night, while the world sleeps and the stars mind their own business, something begins to shift. Not in the house, not in the town, but in the very bones of the earth. The beans don't grow like normal plants. They erupt, they spiral, they punch through soil and rock and cloud and reason. By morning, there's a green column slicing the sky. It's not a plant, it's an invitation, or maybe a dare. And Jack doesn't hesitate. He climbs. Of course he climbs. Because hunger makes you reckless, desperation makes you stupid. And wonder is the most dangerous drug of all. He grabs the stalk, which is slick with dew and humming with something that isn't electricity, but feels close. His fingers find grooves where vines have twisted around themselves in impossible knots. The smell is somewhere between rain and rot, and the higher he climbs, the quieter the world below becomes. At first it's just the wind, then the birds vanish, then even the air starts to change. It's thinner, colder, like the breath of something ancient, something watching. Now let's pause here, because most of us would have stopped. Most of us wouldn't have climbed into the atmosphere on faith and hunger alone. But Jack isn't most people. Jack is the kind of person who opens the one door marked "Do Not Enter," the kind of person who touches the cursed artifact, the kind of person who dies first in horror movies, or becomes legend. So Jack climbs and climbs and climbs. No food, no gear, no plan, just pure, unfiltered, myth-level audacity. And when he finally reaches the top, when the clouds thin and he finds ground again, it's not the sky that greets him. It's something else. The world above the clouds isn't heaven. It's not Olympus. It's not some realm of enlightenment with golden gates and chubby angels. It's silent, cold and vast. A grey-green landscape stretches before him, lit by a sun that seems weaker, like it's struggling to remember how to shine. The air smells old, not musty or mouldy, ancient, like time itself has been fermenting up here. There's a castle in the distance, massive and still, casting a shadow so long it seems to stretch back into Jack's own memories. And in that castle, not just a giant, a presence. Because the giant isn't just some big dude with a gold fetish. He's a gatekeeper, a warden, maybe even a god. And he's guarding things Jack was never meant to touch. A hen that lays golden eggs, a harp that sings itself, a bag of endless riches. They sound like prizes, but they're not. They're symbols, their immortality rebranded as treasure. Jack didn't climb to steal. He climbed into death's waiting room. And now he's trespassing. What happens next? Theft, escape, and the beginning of something even worse than hunger. Consequences. So here we are. Jack has shattered the sky, climbing through the clouds and into a place most wouldn't dare dream of. And instead of heaven, bright, warm, welcoming, he finds a realm of silence that wraps itself around his body like a shroud. A place where even the wind seems to hold its breath. And the cold isn't just physical. It's the kind of chill that makes your bones feel like they're not entirely yours anymore. He walks toward the castle, not because he knows what's ahead, but because in places like this, standing still feels worse than walking blind. And each step across this strange ground, this muted sky landscape, feels like a question he can't answer, and a promise he didn't mean to make. The castle grows as he nears, not just in size but in wrongness. Its architecture bends perspective. Its windows slice the air like they're trying to breathe. And the doors yawn open, too wide, like a mouth waiting to swallow, while the silence thickens, not empty, but crowded, like the walls themselves are listening. Inside, the air presses in close and heavy, and in the stillness sits the giant. Not fuming or pacing or growling, but watching, and those eyes, wide and still and unblinking, hold something too large to be called thought and too ancient to be named fear. This isn't a giant from storybooks. This is a being older than storybooks, older than language, older than the idea of giants. And Jack, despite every warning silence offers, does what Jack always does. He moves forward, not with stealth, but with the kind of loud human assumption that the world belongs to whoever touches it first. He moves through the silence. He lifts what should not be lifted. He takes what was never his to hold. A hen whose eggs shine with impossible gold, claimed as if it were a prize in a village fair. A harp that plays melodies older than oceans, snatched like it was just another trinket. A bag that promises endless wealth without cost, stuffed into a sack as if it were just loot from a raid. To Jack, they're trophies of cleverness. To the world above, they are sacred. He doesn't loot a castle, he violates a tomb. And here's the thing, this moment, this precise breath in time, echoes across the bones of every myth ever whispered, by firelight or scratched into stone. The moment a mortal believes they can pocket eternity without price, the instant when boldness tips into theft, and theft bleeds into doom. Prometheus grasping fire, Eve tasting knowledge, every wanderer who confused divine with free. Jack is their echo. The relics he grabs are not treasure. They are the scaffolding of balance, incarnations of endless processes, creation, harmony, abundance, made material not for use, but for reverence. And when Jack wraps his arms around them, the castle doesn't groan. It inhales the entire structure, pulling tight like lungs filled with the weight of trespass. It breathes, stone flexes under unseen pressure. The floor hums with intent. The walls seem to fold closer, as if the very air seeks to swallow the intruder whole. Then the giant rises, not enraged, but inevitable, not rushed, but massive, as if gravity itself has been reversed, as if consequence has become a creature. The world isn't reacting to Jack, it's correcting him. He flees back to the stalk, which now sways not like a miracle, but like a curse, its leaves quivering, not with life, but with the memory of something broken. His hands slip, his chest heaves, the harp screams, the hen flails, the gold drags against his speed. Behind him nothing runs, but everything follows. Not footsteps, not sound, just presence, judgment. Reckoning so large it has forgotten how to be loud. And though his body hurls itself downward, some part of Jack knows the fall won't save him. That weight and speed and escape routes won't protect him from what he's become. Still he descends. Mud meets his feet like a slap. The breath he draws is thick with earth and desperation. He doesn't hesitate. He grabs the axe, not to fight, to erase. He swings with all the fury of someone who has glimpsed a truth too large to hold. Again. Then again. Each strike more frantic than the last, more desperate than planned. Wood splinters. The stalk shudders. The clouds above quake. And then it gives. The bridge collapses. The sky breaks. The weight falls. The giant crashes earthward, not roaring but descending with the inevitability of a planet reclaiming its fallen moon. A silence so loud it makes the world flinch. And Jack stands amid the wreckage, breathless, covered in dirt, the spoils of his heist still clutched to his chest. The silence returned, but never healed. He is alive, he is rich, he is awake, but he is not safe, because the gate is closed, and the dead do not forget. They wait. Let's get something straight. This story doesn't end when the giant hits the dirt. It doesn't wrap up neatly, with Jack smiling over his loot, a golden hen clucking by his feet, and a harp humming lullabies in the background, like the credits are about to roll. Because myths don't work that way. They don't hand you a prize and let you walk away clean. They bury things deep, then wait for you to dig them up. And the second you do, they make sure you carry what you found for the rest of your life. Jack might have made it down the stalk. He might have cut the bridge. He might have even buried the last trace of that impossible sky world. But the weight he brought with him, it didn't vanish. It settled in his bones, in his breath, in the way his shadow moved, like it was thinking for itself. Let's talk about what he actually carried back. That hen, it doesn't just lay gold, it lays eternity in digestible increments. The harp doesn't just play, it weaves songs from dreams you haven't had yet. And that bottomless bag, it's a hole in the world where wealth pours out faster than time can make sense of it. None of it is normal. None of it belongs here. At first, sure, it looks like victory. Jack's starving mother eats. The house no longer rots from the corners. The townspeople whisper, then cheer, then line up to watch the miracles. But every gift he offers becomes a mirror, and everyone who looks too long sees something else staring back. The gold doesn't just attract envy, it breeds hunger, not for food, for more. The harp doesn't just soothe, it stirs memories of loss in people who've never grieved. And the hen, it keeps laying, and laying, and laying, until the floorboards sag and the cellar shines, and Jack begins to wonder what happens when it stops, or worse, What happens if it never does? Because immortality, in any form, is a problem. It doesn't adapt, it erodes, slowly, quietly, like floodwater beneath the foundation of a house you thought would last forever. And Jack, the poor boy who climbed for salvation, begins to feel the cracks. He walks through crowds, and people don't see him. They see what he touched, they see the story, not the scars, not the sleepless nights, not the weight of knowing he killed something ancient and sacred and necessary. At night, the harp sings on its own. The gold multiplies in patterns that resemble eyes. The hen watches him, and Jack starts to forget what hunger felt like, what fear was for, what it meant to not own things that shouldn't exist. He has everything, but he's never felt poorer. You see, mythic theft isn't about the heist, it's about the aftermath. It's about what the story leaves behind in the thief. And Jack is haunted, not by the giant's shadow, but by what he brought back in its place. And somewhere, under the soil where the stalk once reached into heaven, or hell, or somewhere between, a root twitches. The story isn't finished, because nothing truly ends when a god dies. Something always grows from the corpse. And Jack, for all his cleverness, has no idea what he's planted. Stay close, the ground is shifting. It begins not with thunder or screams, not even with the kind of eerie silence you'd expect in a story like this, but with something softer and stranger, whispers that aren't carried by mouths, but by wind that creeps through floorboards, by cold that clings to windowsills, and by a hum that seems to vibrate beneath the house, like breath trapped in the foundation. These whispers don't announce themselves. They simply arrive and make themselves known in the corners of things. Too quiet to fully grasp, but too persistent to ignore. Like a song half remembered, or a dream that clings to you long after waking. Jack notices them mostly at night, when the rest of the world has settled into sleep, and the house begins to move in its own rhythm. That's when the harp hums without being touched, plucking ghost notes that don't form a melody, but instead drift as fragments, lullabies that feel older than language and closer to breathing than song, always carrying that same unspoken question. Why did you come back? He tries to push it aside to focus on what he has, feeds the hen, counts the gold, polishes the harp, but the comfort he once found in those actions has evaporated, replaced by a nervous repetition, a routine he performs not out of satisfaction, but out of obligation, all while pretending not to notice how the villagers look at him with unease, as if something around him bends light or makes their shadows too long. The gold, once dazzling, now piles like guilt in the corners of the room, untouched and gleaming with a kind of judgmental heat, while the hen lays faster, and the harp sings louder, and the bag of coins, ever full, ever open, seeps into cracks in the floor that weren't there a week ago. Outside, the garden has begun to shift in ways he can't quite explain, but feels in his stomach, with vegetables that taste of metal and vines that curl upward, regardless of light, straining not for the sun, but for something else entirely, while the soil beneath his feet pulses, like it knows his name, and beats in sync with the heart he no longer trusts. He stopped going into town altogether, not because they told him to stay away, but because something in him agrees with their fear. He has become a story no one wants to hear the end of. The dreams are worse. Sometimes it's just images, a skyline made of ribs, a castle where the walls breathe, the giant's hand reaching but never touching, while other times it's voices he can't remember and roots that stretch forever, winding through time like veins beneath skin, threading everything together with purpose he doesn't understand, but feels, every second of every day. And still he tells himself this isn't a curse. No plagues, no lightning, no divine wrath made visible, just unease that creeps slowly, wrapping his life in a fog of uncertainty, as if the universe has decided to respond not with punishment, but with observation, waiting to see what he'll do next. The harp changes key, subtle but wrong. The hen's eyes no longer blink. The gold grows warm when he touches it, like it's remembering him. So Jack makes a decision, not out of courage, but out of exhaustion, the kind of weary resignation that grows when you realise the prize you've taken can't be owned, only carried. Before dawn, he picks up a shovel and walks to the edge of his land, to a spot just far enough that the house can't see him, and begins to dig, not frantically, but methodically, like he's burying more than objects, like he's interring a chapter of himself. He doesn't speak, doesn't say goodbye, just digs a hole deep enough that the wind disappears when he stands inside, and into it he places the relics one by one. The harp resists, writhing in his grip, like a living thing that doesn't want to sleep again. The gold leaves blisters where it touches skin. The hen, for the first time, looks at him not with confusion, but with something too knowing for comfort. He buries them all, covers the hole, and steps back, breathing not in relief, but in hesitation, because the silence that follows isn't silence at all. It's the world holding its breath, deciding whether to forgive him or simply file his name away. And he feels it, not around him, but inside. The part of him that held the relics has been emptied, but not closed, left stretched and thin and echoing, and his hands, now free, feel like they've forgotten their purpose. He turns to face the house, expecting it to feel like home again, but it stands darker than he remembers. Not unlit, but dimmed from within, as if it too has given something up and is quietly mourning the loss. In the days that follow, the world doesn't reset. The soil stays grey, no one comes to visit. The sun forgets how to rise slowly, and instead drops from one sky to another, like time is tripping over itself. Birds vanish, silence thickens, and then one morning, right where he buried it all, something rises. Not a beanstalk, not a tree, not even something truly alive, but a sprout pale and coiled inward, not stretching toward the sky but folding into itself, as if it's less interested in growing than in remembering what it used to be. Jack doesn't touch it. He kneels beside it, watches, because somewhere inside, beneath everything he's buried and everything he still carries, he knows the truth. This story isn't finished. Not even close. It didn't shoot up. It didn't glow. It didn't shimmer with celestial light or pulse with mystical energy. It simply lingered. That tiny coiled sprout, bone pale and curling into itself, did not behave like anything Jack or the soil had seen before, and perhaps that was the most terrifying thing about it, because it didn't seem to want to become anything. It seemed content to exist, watching. And Jack, who had climbed into the sky on a stalk that grew overnight, now found himself staring down at something that refused to grow at all. Days passed, then a week. The garden around it shriveled, not from neglect, but as though it had been outvoted. The sprout never withered, never lengthened, never stretched toward the sun. It curled tighter, retreating from daylight. If he touched it, and he only tried once, his fingers tingled for hours, as if they'd brushed the edge of something unfinished, not forbidden, just incomplete. What unsettled Jack most was the silence around it, not the absence of birdsong or wind. Those had disappeared long before, but a kind of emotional stillness. He didn't feel fear. He didn't feel awe. He felt erased, like in the presence of that sprout he no longer counted as real. He stopped tending the garden. He stopped counting the days. The villagers had long since stopped coming, but now even the air seemed to avoid his land. Weather moved around it. Insects passed over it. Light faded as it approached. One night, as he stared at it from his window, he thought he saw it move. Not grow, not stretch, but unfurl slightly, like it was inhaling something he couldn't hear. And when he blinked, it was still again, still coiled, still wrong. He began to dream again. Only now the dreams were quieter, less like stories and more like instructions. He would see soil parting in spirals, roots twisting through bones, the harp singing in reverse, the gold melting into light. Sometimes he saw his own face, older, more hollow, staring down at the sprout with recognition. And in every dream, the same phrase came to him, not spoken, but etched into the back of his skull. You brought it back. Now it remembers you. He didn't sleep much after that. It wasn't just memory returning. It was something else, something ancestral, not in the blood, but beneath it. Something that lived in the dark before stories had words. Something that had once been part of the sky but now had roots. Jack didn't know what to do. The relics were gone. The treasure was buried. The harm, if it had been done, was already done. And yet, here it was. This fragment, this holdover, this seed that should have died with the stalk but hadn't. He built a fence around it, not to protect it, but to contain it. Wooden posts, rope strung between, a circle crude and imperfect, but symbolic. Maybe, he thought, myths still respected symbols, but it didn't seem to notice. The sprout continued as it always had, coiled, still, unreadable, until one morning it wasn't. Jack stepped out, expecting sameness, and instead saw that the sprout had changed. Not grown, but cracked. A seam down its side had opened, revealing a thin sliver of colour. Neither green nor gold, nor any shade he had language for, but something deep and strange, like shadow lit from within. And in that moment, standing barefoot in the grey earth, with the wind dead around him, and the sun too afraid to rise, Jack understood something he hadn't before. He had thought he ended the story, but maybe what he cut down wasn't the beanstalk. Maybe it was the lid. And now, something beneath the surface was waking up, not to punish, to continue. Jack had always thought the stalk was the end of the road, that cutting it down meant closing the chapter, sealing off the madness above the clouds, and planting himself firmly back into the safety of solid ground. But he was beginning to understand that you don't get to unwrite your place in a myth just because you're tired of carrying it. Because once you've breached the boundary between this world and something deeper, that connection is carved into you, etched in ways not even time can scrub clean. He had buried the artifacts, distanced himself from the gold and the harp and the hen, thinking maybe guilt was something you could put back in the earth and forget. But now, with that strange sprout unfurling in the quiet shade of the fence he'd built, it became increasingly obvious that this was never about possession. It was about proximity, about what he had touched and how what he touched had, in turn, decided to stay with him. His dreams were no longer about castles or giants or riches. They became maps, not of places he could travel to, but of himself, a topography of scars and gaps and strange new seams that hadn't been there before. And in those dreams he would feel soil creeping up his ankles or roots threading through the folds of his ribs, not suffocating him, but claiming him like something they had been waiting on. Every morning he woke lighter, not in body but in substance, as if some small part of him had been drawn away during the night, collected by whatever lived beneath the sprout's coiled body, and stored for later. And though he tried to continue walking through the rituals of his daily life, feeding himself, sweeping the steps, pretending to read old letters, there was no illusion left that any of it meant something. The villagers hadn't seen him in weeks, but more than that, they hadn't asked about him either, as if he had already slipped into the borderlands of legend, where people become stories before they die, and his house too responded to this shift. Not falling apart, but freezing in a kind of stasis, the walls refusing to creak, the doors never swelling in the heat. the wood remaining unnaturally smooth, as though aging had stopped respecting it. On the 7th night after the sprout cracked open, the wind returned, but it came low and slow, threading through the trees without touching their leaves, curling around the corners of the house, like it was sniffing, testing the edges of reality for soft spots. And when Jack opened the window to feel it, what met him wasn't air. It was memory, raw and unformed, a sensation like standing in front of a door. You forgot you locked from the outside. He didn't sleep that night. And in the morning the sprout had changed again. Not taller, not broader, but more aware, bending slightly in his direction, as if it could feel him even from the house. And when he stepped outside, barefoot and half dreaming, the ground beneath his feet hummed softly. Not threatening but alert, like the moment before a word is spoken. That day, he spoke to it. He didn't plan to. He didn't think the words would matter. But standing there, face to face with something that shouldn't be, and yet unmistakably was, he said, "I didn't know what I was doing." And the sprout didn't reply, but it didn't need to, because Jack finally realised this was never about whether he knew. It was about the fact that he did. He took, he fled, he returned. And now the world he escaped was following him home, not with wrath, but with roots. The return was never his to choose. It never is. It began as a tremor. Not the violent kind that sends villagers fleeing from their doors, but the quiet, rippling kind, barely perceptible, unless you happen to be standing perfectly still. Jack felt it not in the soles of his feet, but in the marrow of his bones, like something deep within the earth had exhaled for the first time in centuries. And just as quickly, it stopped, leaving behind not fear, but something worse, anticipation. The sprout didn't grow, not upward, but outward. Its roots, previously hidden, began to surface in odd places, splintering fence posts, curling beneath his doorstep, threading through the seams of the walls. They didn't move with violence, they moved with intent. And Jack, who had once thought himself brave for climbing a beanstalk into the sky, now found himself hesitating to step outside, because whatever was beneath his home was not growing to reach the heavens. It was searching for him. He tried again to rid himself of what he'd buried, dug until his hands bled, searched for the place where the harp had last sung, and the gold had last shimmered, but there was nothing. The earth had taken it all, and it seemed, decided to keep him instead. The villagers had long since stopped visiting, but now even the woods grew silent. No birds, no rustling, no sounds except the soft, rhythmic hum beneath his floorboards, like a heartbeat growing louder with each passing night. He began to dream less and hallucinate more, faces at the window that vanished when blinked at, shadows moving in patterns no lamp could explain, the harp's music looping in places where silence should have been. One morning he woke to find his bed covered in soil. Not much, just enough to matter, enough to be a warning. That day he ventured to the sprout again, not to challenge it, but to see what it had become. And there it was, no taller, no broader, but splitting now, forming a ring, as though the plant itself had become a gate. Inside the ring the soil was black, richer, wetter, breathing, and in the centre a single object sat. Something small, something metallic. The air above the ring felt denser, charged not with storm, but with history, and the soil beneath it didn't just smell like earth, it carried the scent of something scorched long ago, like it had once been fire, and chose to become soil instead. Not dead, remembering. It was a bell, not bright polished brass, but tarnished iron, etched with symbols he couldn't read, and clearly not meant for celebration. He didn't touch it. He simply stood there, watching as the sprout curved protectively around it, and somehow he knew it wasn't meant for him to ring. It was meant for something else, something waiting. Because the thing about gates is they go both ways. And if you open one, something is always on the other side, waiting to step through. Jack backed away, and the ground didn't tremble. It listened. The bell never rang. Days passed, then more. Jack checked it each morning as if expecting it to vanish or transform or announce itself, but it remained still, settled in the black soil ringed by that silent sprout, untouched by wind or light or time. But while the bell did not move, the air around it changed. Pressure built like breath caught in a throat, and the space just outside its reach seemed to warp. Subtle bends in vision, a slight shimmer, when the morning sun hit it wrong. Jack started hearing the wind again, but not the old wind. The new one whispered sideways, carried scents from nowhere, and hummed in tones that weren't notes but questions. Not spoken aloud, not meant to be answered, just there like fog inside your lungs. He began to feel watched, not by eyes but by awareness. His house grew colder, though the fire never died. His footsteps echoed longer than they should. The woods, once too quiet, began to hum again, but not with life, with memory. Then one morning he saw footprints, not his, not fresh, old ones, preserved in damp soil, leading from the base of the sprout across the yard and disappearing into the shadow of his house. They were too long. The spacing wasn't right. They pressed deep, like the earth was leaning into them rather than being pressed down. Jack didn't follow them. He didn't erase them either. He just watched. Each night after, they returned, different now. Some circling, some pacing. No two sets ever quite matched. He stopped looking for logic in their pattern. This wasn't logic, it was ritual. And the bell never rang. That was the worst part. It didn't cry out, it didn't shimmer, it didn't scream, it waited, because it didn't need to summon what had already arrived. Jack knew something had crossed. Maybe not through the gate, not in the way he expected. Maybe it seeped instead, through cracks, through him, through memory. Maybe he was the gate now. The soil inside the ring never dried, it pulsed. Once, when he stood too close, he felt something brush the sole of his foot from beneath the ground. Not a hand, not a root, something curious, something polite, and still the bell did not move. He started to speak to it, not in pleading, not in prayer, just acknowledgement, naming things aloud, his regrets, his fears, his failures, his hunger for things he no longer dared to want. Somewhere in that long silence, Jack stopped asking to be forgiven. He began asking to be remembered. Because deep in the marrow of him, he understood something terrible and true. The danger was never what waited behind the gate. It was what would never leave again after being let through. It didn't begin with fire, or with light, or even with noise. It began with stillness, the kind of stillness that follows understanding when the body hasn't yet caught up to what the soul just learned. Jack stood at the edge of the ring, watching the bell that had not rung, the soil that breathed, and the sprout that coiled like a question, left unanswered. But now the air had changed, not suddenly, not violently. It simply thickened, and in that thickness came clarity, not about what was happening, but what had always been. Jack realized then that he had never escaped anything. Not the giant, not the sky, not the weight of the gold or the songs in the harp. All of it had followed him, not as punishment, but as gravity. Because once you cross into a world that remembers everything, you become something it remembers too. That morning, the ring widened, not through growth, but through hunger. The roots reached farther, the soil cracked deeper, and at the centre of it all, where the bell sat, something rose, a shape made of root and bone, of memory and hunger, a crown without jewels, and a throne without form. Jack didn't run, he didn't pray, he simply stepped forward, one foot after another, the way someone does when they realise the ending has always been waiting exactly where it started. The crown wasn't offered, it was recognised. Because Jack wasn't the thief anymore, he was the gatekeeper, the one who had crossed, the one who returned, and the one who would now decide what came next. The root crown wrapped around his spine, not painfully, but completely. The air folded around him. The bell finally rang, but softly, not as warning, as welcome. And somewhere beneath the soil, something smiled. The story didn't end, it just changed shape. Long before Jack ever met a stork or bartered a cow, there was a whisper that ran beneath the skin of our oldest stories, an echo about climbing too high, stealing from gods, waking things that should have slept. The tale we called Jack and the Beanstalk didn't spring from a Victorian nursery or a book of English fairy tales. It is older than print, older than paper, perhaps even older than language. Fragments of this myth, the sky reacher, the trickster child, the theft of divine goods, can be traced back more than 5,000 years. Similar motifs have surfaced in ancient Indo-European lore, from Norse sagas about world trees to the Mesopotamian stories of sacred mountains. In almost every culture, there is a version, a mortal who crosses into a sacred realm, steals something powerful, and is forever changed, or cursed, by the return. In England, the tale coalesced into its more familiar form around the 18th century, but its roots run deeper, tangled in the same mythic soil that gave us stories of Prometheus, of Icarus, of the garden and the serpent. Jack is every boy who ever reached beyond his place, every thief who mistook divine order for mere treasure. This version doesn't sanitize that theft. It doesn't make the giant a villain or paint Jack's cleverness as clean. Because the bones of the story were never about morality. They were warnings, echoes, pathways to memory. Jack didn't just climb, he opened something. And once opened, a story like this doesn't close. It grows, evolves, follows you down. So when you hear the tale again, when you read about the golden harp or the bean that climbs, listen harder. Beneath the rhymes and the smiles, there's a root system of ancient fear, of awe, of things that wait in the soil, and stories that never die. This version doesn't retell the tale. It answers what the soil never stopped whispering.